This is how I drew the mouth before studying it. It's actually decent. The structure and volume are visible, but I didn't understand it in the way I thought I did. Going into the study, I expected the improvement to be obvious. Cleaner shapes, better proportions. But after 2 weeks of studying it, the drawing barely changed. At least not in the way I expected it. So if the final result doesn't look dramatically better, was the study even successful? I think yes, because the biggest change wasn't the drawing itself. It was what I could see, what I could explain, and what I actually understood. So in this video, I'm going quickly through where I started, what I studied, what changed in the redraws, and what I still need to practice more. This is where I started. I made one baseline drawing for each main angle I wanted to improve, all from imagination. And honestly, they're not terrible. The structure is there. The placement is mostly okay. You can tell I had some idea of how the mouth works. I knew the upper lip was usually thinner, with that little heart-shaped center. And I knew the lower lip had more volume, in a tube-like shape. But in the more challenging three-quarter view, my lack of understanding showed itself. The mouth looks like something placed on top of the face instead of actually belonging to it. I drew it like a shape instead of a form wrapping around the teeth. Especially the foreshortening was more guessing than really knowing how to draw it. And looking at it now, the biggest issue was definitely the corners of the mouth. I didn't really understand what they were, why they had that shape, or why those dark little shadow areas appear there. The problem wasn't that I couldn't draw a mouth at all. The problem was that I couldn't always explain why it worked or why it didn't. So instead of trying to draw more mouths and hoping they would magically get better, I wanted to slow down and actually figure out what I was missing. So I started watching tutorials, reading guides, and doing my own observations. While doing that, I took notes on the main things that kept coming up. Then I tried to turn those notes into simple rules for construction and clear building blocks I could actually use. And after that, when I did studies from reference, I wasn't just copying what I saw anymore. I tried to actively look for those rules and apply them while drawing. Let's go over the main points that helped me understand the lips and the mouth more clearly. First, the lips can be separated into 5 main parts, with the upper middle heart-shaped part sticking out. The lower lip can often be divided into 2 larger sections, with a visible dent in the middle. At the corners, there is a muscle that wraps around the mouth and creates this little upward-facing dent. That is also why there is this transition from a darker to a lighter area here. For example, before the study, I would have drawn the corner of the mouth as just a little triangle. But now I understand it more as a small form change caused by the muscle wrapping around the mouth. Under the lower lip, there's a heavier dent, and that area transitions into more rounded forms on the side. These are called the pillars. Another important thing is that the upper lip overlaps the lower lip on the outer sides, while the lower lip goes under it at the corners. With contour lines drawn across the mouth, it becomes easier to see that the outer parts of the lower lip are really soft where they connect to the pillars. There's actually no or only a very subtle change in form here. The lower lip blends very softly into the area around it. It doesn't suddenly become a separate plane. So instead of a strong form change, it's more surface texture than a real structural shift. That was really interesting to me, because I had never really noticed it before. So for the front view, the biggest shift was that I stopped seeing the mouth as just an outline and started seeing all these small transitions around it. Inside, the planes of the mouth become much easier to see. They create this staircase-like shape, and because of that, the planes move in and out of light and shadow. So it becomes this alternating pattern, light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. The whole mouth also tends to have a more downward angle when it is relaxed. and the upper lip usually protrudes slightly more. But of course, this is just one way to draw it. Depending on the character or expression, it can be exaggerated or even switched. Since this was my first real study of the mouth, I wanted to keep things limited to more neutral expressions. But it is still useful to know that the jaw hinges when the mouth opens. The upper part stays mostly in place, while the lower part moves. With this angle, I had a harder time finding clear rules or guidelines. Usually I look for landmarks I can rely on, so the drawing still feels believable. If I can keep those landmarks consistent, the subject usually reads clearly. But this time I couldn't really find them. I could see the staircase shape and I understood the basic light-dark light pattern, but I still didn't have a clear checklist for defining the volumes correctly. So this is definitely something I need to come back to and study more. But let's move on to the 3/4 view. For this angle, I found it most helpful to think of the mouth wrapping around a circle. That circle helped me visualize how the mouth curves around the face and around the teeth. So I draw the circle from the middle of the nose down to the beginning of the chin, and then place a line around that circle roughly where the mouth sits. The most important realization I had with this angle was the overlapping forms. It's not just a heart-shaped middle part that usually sticks out. The overlaps on the far side of the mouth are especially important. Keeping these T-intersections makes the mouth read much more clearly, even when the corner on the other side is barely visible. And taking a closer look at these overlaps was probably the biggest learning for me. I always struggled with the far side of the lips. I just didn't really know how to draw it, and you can see that pretty clearly in the baseline drawing. So at this point, the main things I wanted to test were the corners of the mouth, the soft transition into the pillars, and especially whether I could make the 3/4 view feel less flat and more wrapped around the face. After going through and studying all these basic views, I did the redraws from imagination. I did 2 for each angle. One completely closed and neutral, and one slightly open. And as always, I kept everything in grayscale because I'm still not really comfortable using color. So I tried to lean more into values instead, with more or less success. Some attempts worked better than others. The front views were mixed, the side views were still challenging, but the 3/4 views immediately felt stronger. So let's compare them to the baseline drawings. When I first compared the redrawings to the baselines, I was honestly a bit disappointed. They don't look that much better. Especially the front view didn't improve as much as I expected. If I only look at the lips, I actually like the baseline drawing even more than the redraw. So visually, the improvement is not super dramatic. But mentally, it feels like a much bigger shift. The biggest improvement is definitely in the 3/4 view. It actually reads more like proper volumes with real form, and you can see the mouth curving around the teeth more clearly. I also understand the structures around the mouth a lot better now. Because before I basically only knew about the dip between the lower lip and the chin. Now I also think about the pillars, the corners of the mouth, and how those forms connect. And that makes sense because the 3/4 view was also where I had the clearest study takeaway. But let's not talk about the side view too much. It still needs more practice, and that's okay. Not every study needs to turn immediately into a better drawing. Did I master drawing the mouth? No, definitely not. But do I understand more about the structure, the planes, and the values now? And can I explain why something looks off? That's a pretty big yes. So yeah, I already could draw a decent mouth. But a lot of the time I was placing lines without really knowing why they needed to be there. This study didn't magically fix my drawings, but it filled the gap between drawing something that looks kind of right and actually understanding it. So when you study anatomy, do you always see improvement right away? Or is it like this, where the drawing slowly changes, but your understanding changes a lot first? Let me know in the comments down below. This was the last part of the human body I want to study for now. So next is applying all this. But I'm sure I will be coming back to mouth studies at some point in the future. I'm also working on a small side project. Some of you know I'm a software engineer, and I really want to combine my love for drawing with the programming side of things. So stay tuned if you want to hear more about it. And if you're still here, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next one.